Thank you, Rabbi. It occurred to me on the way here that my dad outlived all the restaurants he ate lunch at. I mean, I could go to New Clements, Papa Leone, Seniors, Sheep's Bay Diner, basically every diner, you know. So food was a very important role. My father actually was the youngest 100-year-old person in the world. I mean, there are a few other 100-year-old people out there, but he really was a kid right to the end. I mean, he was incredibly responsible and a great provider and strong and all that. But he was a kid. He was very boyish. He just, that's, you know, what's the secret to, you know, living to 100, you know. And by the way, there's a lot to cover because he's 100, so I hope you brought a change of clothing. I see Susan and Michael, they were smart. They brought luggage. That's really what we need. And so I remember, you know, we would go, lunch was like the biggest thing. And when my mom was alive, my dad, and we generally would get to lunch at like 3:45. That was the lunchtime, and my dad would always look around and go, gee, it's empty here. But yeah, Dad, it's 3:45. I think it's, you know. So many, I mean, I can't cover all the things. I hope you got a chance to look at that. But, you know, there's just, first of all, to me, you know, all of you and everyone is, how do you feel? And the only word, the first, is gratitude. How could you not just be thankful? You could be greedy and go, oh, why not 101? But you know what? When people say, and I know there's time to do this cliches and this, but my dad truly lived his life to the fullest. I mean, just literally, I mean, you know, because any more than that, it wouldn't have been the life that you know, he would have wanted. And you know, for me personally, the greatest thing in my life was moving back home, you know, which may not be appealing on J-Date, 63 and living at home, but I don't care about those people. And what a blessing to be there for the last 6 weeks of life. I didn't know it was going to be the last 6 weeks, but instead of schlepping from Scarsdale 4 hours, I got to put that 4 hours, and I mean, I literally got hundreds of extra hours with my dad just by being there. So that's the best thing I've ever done in my life was to be there. And he was such a funny guy, and that's you know, the funniest guy I've ever known. I mean, and you know, some of it was a little corny, some of it was cerebral. I mean, it was all that. I mean, and I could, you know, a lot of you have heard a lot of them, but I just remember even just the last couple of weeks ago, you know, he wasn't feeling great, he was coughing, and you know, I didn't expect him to say anything, much less a joke. And what we always, the biggest part, I think, of my dad and I, we sat and watched music. I think if you can relate to that, Music Choice, channel 896, Singers and Swing, the big bands, and we just would sit there and actually look at the screen. God forbid you look away, you can't hear the music anymore. You know? So, and my dad would always point out things like, they say, you know, Bobby Darin signed to Capitol Records in 1953. My dad goes, signed to? It should be with, you know. And I became an expert at every big band. I knew it. You know, Red Norvo. Oh, he was married to Mildred Bailey for 5 years. I just knew it. And my dad knew all that. He would always talk about seeing the big bands and seeing Benny Goodman. And once he saw Benny Goodman, maybe the Hotel Pennsylvania, and he saw that the maitre d' pointed over, and there was a guy standing against the wall and said, and the accent my dad gave was, that's Glenn Miller. So, I mean, just hearing these stories, and it was, you know, it was the soundtrack of our life, basically, the big bands and swing, and it was something I started loving when I was like 21 too. So, if we could have music here, it would be, you know, all the big bands, but you know, so yeah, so we were watching this was a couple weeks ago, and I really just thought he wasn't paying attention, or he wasn't feeling great, and it was Vicky Carr, if you remember her, or Miss Vicky Carr, as they would say in those days. And it was a song, and he just, out of nowhere, just said, yeah, Vicky Carr, her father was involved with transportation. That just came out. And he would just do jokes, and then he would, generally, I'd call him, he'd say, yeah, what are you watching TV? Or what are you watching? A Chinese channel, Muting. You know, and earlier on he had corny ones, like he'd say, you know, woman, I was wearing a German coat. It was Fraulein. Things like that that Mike Fine, great comedians here. It comes in handy sometimes when they want. And just so that was an instinct. Is always to be funny and I'm jumping around here, but it's just like I said, you can only feel gratitude. I'll start with this last weekend. I don't know what the ritual is, what you're supposed to do, but I was so blessed that Wendy, I'm sorry I haven't contributed to the number of kids in the family, but you took care of it by having 4, so it's great. Are you Hasidic? No, but and so blessed to have the greatest 3 nephews and niece and their wonderful girlfriends and boyfriend. But I mean, really just incredible when people go end of an era. No, it's not the end of anything. And when I've known this for a long time, and I don't want to say you kids because then I feel really old. They're in their 30s. If I say you kids, I'm like 90. But it's just incredible. I mean, and so, I'm so proud of you, Wendy, but the way everybody's turned out is amazing. And just so, and this weekend, just by how things worked out, my dad passed late Thursday night, and we're going to have this today. And so we got to have family dinners, and all I could think about, Dad would like this place. Finally went to Randazzo's Clam House in Sheepshead Bay, and all I could think about, Dad, big portions. My dad was like, that was the biggest thing, gigantic portions. So I just, and we had, as I talked about it here at my mom's funeral, so blessed to have the women in our life who, the word is AIDS, but that's not a good word. It's part of the family. And, I'll start with Darlene is here, who's the newest part of the family. And you just, even though it's for a short time, you brought such care and love and calm and grace and elegance, and you wrote such a beautiful thing. And it goes without saying that all of you not only kept my dad alive longer, but made his life wonderful, because you were the ones with him. And really the last few months or more, even though he was himself a lot of the time, there were times he wasn't. It could be challenging, and I just appreciate so much. And Claudina, everything you've done, and not focusing on that, even when your mom has health issues, and we appreciate that so much. And Marcia isn't here, but she, incredible, just would come in, and my dad loved it. She would say, "Doctor, doctor, doctor." Trinidad, and he always liked it, going, "It's Dr. Blakeman." And as he should, he worked hard to get to that. And everyone just loved it. And then, of course, we get to Audrey, who has been part of our family literally for 22 years. And, I could do hours just about Audrey, and we talked about her with my mom. And, just seamlessly, she went from taking care of my mom, and beyond just taking care of, in that relationship, my mom taught her in the beginning, and then the whole relationship, it was incredible. And then for my dad, and I hope I'm not giving anything private away, but Audrey texted me that she could talk to my dad and be more friends with my dad than some of her personal relationships, and so, I've heard of, the older man syndrome there, but no, but he wasn't, that was the thing, he wasn't old. He would say, I remember once talked about going to some, Dad, there's things for seeing, it's a lot of old people. And he didn't mean it in a derogatory way, but he didn't think of himself that way. And the boyishness was the same thing that anything, I've said this to my mom's, anything that I have that's good about me, I owe completely to my mom and dad. And whatever else is not great, that's my own mishigas. But for my dad, obviously the humor and really having this awe. Our whole family has no pretense, and no matter how people have excelled or succeeded, there's no room for being full of yourself or all that, and no one had that. And my dad, especially, and just appreciated everything. Literally, we'd go to Il Fornetto, where we're all, someone's going to go after the burial, and, of course they loved him there, and just he appreciated everything, and the size of the portion of the food, and that's a sense of appreciating everything. And it just didn't start with him, and my dad told so many stories, and Some of them he would repeat, but I can relate to that because that's what I do for a living, is repeating stories, and hopefully they work. And I guess the story that a lot of you have heard, that, and I can't do it justice, but my dad's father, my grandfather, was one of the first and only Jews to work for DuPont. And in fact, at his job interview, they said, "Mr. Blakeman, are you an Israelite?" You know, from Crown Heights. You know, and he was a brilliant guy, and just quiet and reserved, and no airs about him. My grandmother, I think, probably contributed to my dad's sense of humor. She was kind of, he was first to say, intellect was not her main strength, but she was kooky and funny and playful, and that's such a wonderful quality that he inherited. But he tells a story that when my dad wanted to go to Penn, my grandfather set up an interview with Felix DuPont at the time in Wilmington to get a good recommendation to get into Penn. And my dad thought this is going to be some, as it probably would be today, he thought it was going to be some arrogant guy, would have no time for him. And my dad got there, was very nervous, and he always told the story so many times that, you know, he got there and he waited, and then Felix DuPont came out and said, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry to keep you waiting." And he would just say with a giggle, like, "Felix DuPont is apologizing to me for being a little late, and he was so nice to him." And then he said, "You know what? Where are you going? You going back to Philadelphia? Let me give you a ride to the station." And he described how he walked to the garage, and he didn't have a valet or anything like that. He just had like a simple Buick, and he drove him to the station. And he would say something that, the words that he said his whole life, and these, I think, were the most important words, and what was most important to my dad. He'd say, "Such a nice man." And that, you know, these days, nice is probably the, you know, right next to pleasant for words probably that aren't great, especially for a date. You know, I had a nice time. Yes, it was pleasant. I got that. But nice was the greatest tribute to somebody, a nice person. And God knows we don't have that, certainly from above, certainly in our leader. And by the way, let me just say, I don't want to get political, but let me just say that, did President Trump send your dad a 100th birthday thing? And I said, no, and frankly, he's very happy about that too. No, I wish he, but he did have the borough president, Eric Adams, as you saw, proclaimed February 6, 2018 is Arthur Blakeman's 100th birthday celebration day in Brooklyn. And another thing that Amy Gutman, the president of the University of Pennsylvania, wrote him a note that he referred to constantly, because University of Pennsylvania was so important to him, and some people get it confused. It's not Penn State, even though it's a fine school except for the football program. But anyway, but it was Penn, and he loved Penn so much. And I didn't know this until I saw my dad just moments ago. And I'm so glad, and I'll get to more about this, but he has this, in addition to a snazzy suit, because he was a fashion plate, I don't know where that expression came from, but had a beautiful suit, but a Penn hat also next to his heart, because Penn was, you know, everything to him. And we got to go there like 10 years ago, and he may have been the last surviving member of the class of 1938, but then there were like 5 or 6, and they introduced him, and he stood up, and he met the president, Amy Gutman, and talked about her nonstop for the next 10 years. So blessed. And we got to go to the Penn Club and all of that. So I'm jumping around, but let me tell you what happened in the last few days. You know, again, it's a cliche, you know, sorry, and it's like really, you know, nothing to be, you know, of course, we'll all miss him so much, but I mean, literally just everything, living the fullest, and even the way he left us. I mean, well, let me add that the one person I'm getting to now, in addition to all the wonderful women that I mentioned, and by the way, all of you will always be part of our family, always. But Michael, the second oldest nephew, in addition to being... for his nephew, yes, that's it, right. I was going to edit this later, but we can do it now. And if he was not a registered nurse, which he is, he simply would be an amazing human being. Like every single day, my dad would say, "Hey, he's a great kid, that Mike." I said, "He really is." But Michael is the most talented person I know. I mean, he could be politician, lawyer, a million things, but he's an incredible RN, and I don't know how much more challenging it can be to be a grandson and also be a professional in the fullest sense of the word. And what he did for my dad and watching it was just beyond description, nonstop, not just when he was working, and incredible. And we got everything was very quick. Monday he went in the hospital and he slipped, he wasn't conscious then, and then he went into the hospice where my mom was. And I'm sure my dad would go, wow, this is a beautiful resort. There was ocean view, and I hope this isn't a little over the edge, but my dad, I just could think of what jokes he would be making if he could be hearing, and I think he was hearing us. He couldn't speak, but it's so beautiful, the whole hospice process. And one of the nurses said, your dad is transitioning. And in this day and age, I can say, what? I could be, I'm not transgender. What? So what? I'm very happy to be, And it just was so beautiful. And first of all, and I thank Michael for making the call on Monday. I guess I sort of knew, maybe, but sort of in denial. And he said to all, to Heather and Cody and Jesse and everybody, you should come out. And they all got here, I don't know, Tuesday, and we were just there pretty much nonstop in the hospice for 2 days. And just to describe that last day, evening, typically we're Jews, it was hard to figure out where to order in from, and we're going through the book of menus, and there was one from Opera, which, and there were a lot of favorite places my dad, but towards the end, Opera was his favorite place, mostly ordering in because he was very impressed. The bags, beautifully designed, and and he loved it. He loved it. So we ordered in from there. We all had dinner, and just being together those days was so comforting. And then Tosh, Michael's girlfriend, said, guys, come in. And I can't think of a more beautiful moment in my life and more privileged moment because, I guess it's not the end of the world if you're not there, but to be there, and it was 9:50 on Thursday night, and for 5 minutes we got to surround him, and I looked at the reflection in the mirror of the ocean and seeing our faces, and and he hung on, I think, even longer than they thought he looked like that. And he had such a strong heart. In fact, the doctor towards the end said, your dad, he had a lot of congestive heart failure. He said, well, he has an enlarged heart. I said, yeah, I've known that my whole life. He's got the biggest heart of anyone in the world, So, and anyway, to thank Michael again, he had the foresight, and Tosh, they ran back to the house because it was only 5 minutes away, and this was just a sampling. They brought, I don't know, like 10 photographs and everything, and so he was surrounded by this picture of him in 4th grade and other photos, of course, of my mom, and he was wearing his Penn hat. So, we were just so blessed there to all be together, and just again, he, and Alan Lip pointed out that because another blessing was, once my mom started not being as present, I would just talk to my dad all the time and hear these stories. And again, talking about being low key, he hardly mentioned this story, but FDR spoke at his graduation. Alan just reminded me, you think that would be the story he'd repeat all the time? But no, it was nice, and he talked about how no one knew how crippled FDR was. But the story was of Felix DuPont and people like that who were just down-to-earth people and nice people. And every time we went to a restaurant, nice people at East Bay Car Service, nice boys. The Corolla, beautiful car. He just appreciated everything. And so every building and keeping up with that and just all of that. So, and again, he loved clothes. He was an amazing dresser. The garage, I highly recommend. It's a hole in the wall on Stillwell and Avenue S, and they just incredible designer stuff for less, and he always dressed so beautifully, and thanks to Audrey, he even had more of a kind of a hip-hop look. He always had that kind of very cool thing. He had the sweats and everything, and the hoodies, much cooler than me, And I didn't want to dress him that way, but he so thankfully has his Penn hat. And So again, to Michael, I can't thank you enough for just everything, and to all of the women who are part of the family, and especially to Audrey, who, like I said, you may not be in the house, but you're always in our home and always part of the family, and it's just, you were really the rock of the whole family, because it's always like, Audrey, this, and going to doctors and things, and just everything, and there's been no way in 22 years we all could have gotten by, without you, and one other thing too, just, I would always share on Facebook every time I had lunch with my dad or whatever, was pictures of my dad, and it was just so touching, and to show how amazing, what a great guy he was, is that people who even didn't know me, certainly never met him, would just always love when I would post something. When I would post my own things, hi, I've been MSNBC, 9 likes. And Dad and me and Il Fornetto, 600 likes. And that's as it should be, because it's much more important. And finally, when I put up the notice that he had passed, and there's a picture I love that I didn't have a large size of it, but maybe from 3 years ago, and the biggest smile you've ever seen. And I wish there was a way to create smiles, because that's how I always think of him. And just the comments, again, had nothing to do with me. It was just people that, I loved your dad, I never met him, but just, I mean, you can tell what a person is from a picture at lunch. It just says so much about them. They got his sense. He was such a good person, and he was a strong guy. In fact, my dad accomplished something that I think every Jewish guy from Brooklyn wished they could be. He looked Italian for about 30 years. I'd say from like his 20s to probably even 50s, he just looked and it wasn't a tough guy, he was a strong guy, but they had that look. He looked this out with the Banlon shirts and all that. I said Banlon a long time. And, then been in his 50s and 60s, more of a mob boss, but it evolved. But he just was the sweetest, kindest guy. He so down to earth. And that's why he kept repeating that story, and just talking about, he was in the army and as a dentist on Guam, and he would joke about that, and how all the guys got along. It was always just so positive, and how they would have the time that once he went to my grandfather's office in the Empire State Building, worked for DuPont. And again, this wonderment. He wasn't a 9-year-old. He had come in from the war. He had his uniform on, and he said, I walked in, and his name was in the lobby, my father, and then my dad said, and then he walked in, there was a secretary, and I see my father sitting a mile away, this gigantic office, and he just always told that story. And he went to Townsend Harris High School, which at that time was in Manhattan, and it was a big deal to go from Brooklyn to Manhattan. He grew up on President Street in Crown Heights. He lived at 755 Ocean Avenue next to Henny Youngman. He lived at East 19th Street and Beverly Road, and it's going into, because he would always lament how Brooklyn had changed, wasn't what it used to be, but of course he lived long enough to see Brooklyn come back and get great again. I mean, you talk about, as a kid, walking along Flatbush Avenue, and have all the beautiful stores, and it was just a blessing just to get a time capsule for 100 years. And for his 100th birthday, we got him from the New York Times as the front page of every birthday of his life, all 100. And World War I was on, and so it's incredible. But the day my dad passed, we changed the cable plan, because we were holding on to this one tier only to keep MSNBC for my dad, because he watched it all day and he loved everything. And Ari Melber in particular, he said, I think I know him. I said, I don't remember that, but you know what? He probably did. And again, I don't think that people say this isn't the end of anything. I mean, my father is with me always. And anything good, any laugh I get, I owe it to my father. You can't ask for more. And again, just to reiterate, looking at Wendy's kids and the girlfriends, that's just, and Mark, I just met, and coming in, flying overnight from Sacramento. I mean, everybody was here, and I don't say this to be corny or cliche. It's just, I say it to make me feel old, but it's also just, you're the greatest, and my father lives on with all of you. So I never had any doubts about the future and things. But and not only do you spiritually carry on, but Jesse, I think I knew this, but 5 years ago, he got a tattoo of a picture of my dad from the Army, and I would ask him to show it, but I don't think Sherman's has a cabaret license. But and my father had a funny reaction, like, what are you, self-mutilation? You can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery, whatever. But I think he got a kick out of it too, also. So I could go on, but I will go on for the rest of my life. We're all going to go on for the rest of our life, telling stories, and there's a million I left out, and I'm sure like every time I do comedy, I'm going, I left out that thing. But I'm just so blessed, the luckiest guy in the world. Could not have asked for a greater dad, a greater everything, and family, and everything, right up until he joined my mom and Uncle Al and Mitzi and Mel, and we're so blessed. And I should have done a different order possibly, but that Aunt Lucy was there. Total surprise. 95 years young. Aunt Lucy was one of my mom's sister, Mitzi, and they were always pictures together. And just, I guess I'll end on the beginning, is that if it wasn't for Aunt Lucille, we wouldn't all have been here, because she introduced my dad to my mom. She was an accountant at the Neville, and there was, the Army guys, whatever, would come up, and there was a dance, and you met my dad, and thought, not for me, I guess, but which would have been fine, because I would have lived in Teaneck. So it wouldn't have been, I would still had an accent, I still probably would have gone into comedy, so just been more traffic in my life, so you were, and there's a story I heard, whether the first day or not, my dad talked so much that he hadn't touched his food. But this big story is 3 months later, they were engaged, and they were together for 68 years. And another thing too, people say, good genes. Well, I hope so, but there's also a lot of luck involved. And I told this story at my mom's, but when my dad was 60, which seemed old when I told this story years ago, whatever it was, there were some things as older people do, maybe waking up to use the restroom, whatever it was. My mom said, maybe you should just go to the doctor, check it out. And he went to a urologist, and it was kidney cancer, caught so early that they took the kidney out, hadn't spread, didn't need anything, and he lived for 40 more years. So my mother saved my dad's life. So how could you not feel blessed and grateful and lucky and every positive thing? So we're here to celebrate my dad, and just the greatest dad in the whole wide world. And since 1994, and I told this at my mom's, I've always been close, but ever since Aunt Mitzi passed, I remember from that day on in 1994, every day I called my parents to say I love them. So, that's what I just feel so full and lucky that I had all these years to do that, to every night call and say I love you. And then for the last 6 weeks, to be there, and so much fun, to opening the door. And again, it's a room, and I'd open the door, my dad would go, Scotty's here, And it was just the greatest gift. And my dad was the greatest gift for all of us. It is. Just like I said with my mom, it's all is. My dad is the greatest gift, will always be the greatest gift for all of us, and he's the greatest dad in the whole wide world, and I love him so very much. Oh, and I guess I'm emceeing. So, and then now also to speak my wonderful sister Wendy.